Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our friends from around the world, and Happy New Year. Hopefully, some of us will be able to begin to travel this year, and as COVID hopefully dies down a little bit and we all become vaccinated. So, kind of that's the goal, isn't it? So, today, my guest is Werner Erasmus. Werner is a partner at Ernst Young in the consulting practice, and his focus is on technology risk. He is the America's technology risk leader, where he develops, drives, and leads programs that strengthen the skill sets of EY professionals and enables them to provide a highly valued skill set in support of their clients by translating uncertainty into confidence, thereby helping their clients accelerate business performance. To be clear, his responsibility covers the United States, Canada, all of South America, and Israel. He's going to talk today about the pace of technological change as it continues to evolve and the opportunities that are presented for organizations and society. All of his comments today are his own. He is not representing Ernst Young. And before I bring him on, I would like to share one other thing with him. I've known Werner for about 16 years. Back in 2006, when I was at HBO and I was managing audit and compliance. And I remember him when he was a senior manager as he evolved and he's worked his way up into a partner. But what you need to know about him is he was one of the best people with whom I've ever worked. And subsequent to that, when I've been working with Ernst Young, I'd always ask, who trained you? And if they said it was Werner, it always put a smile on my face because I knew those folks were really good at their job and their roles and what they were doing. So with that, I'd like to introduce him. Werner, welcome. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Norm. That's quite an introduction. Thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. I just want to tell it like it is, and you know that. I mean, I think everybody that I've ever spoken to that you train just loves the way they were taught. So you can't get a better compliment than that. So tell me, what keeps you up at night, Werner? What do you want to talk about?
So nothing keeps me up at night, Norm. When I go to bed, I sleep. But there is a lot. There is a lot that runs through my mind when I'm awake, and kind of thinking about where our industry is going, everything that's kind of changing in the world.
Sure.
So the things that I kind of like to pay a lot of attention to is multifaceted. It's about the pace of change that we're going through and how we need to make sure we continue manage risk in the right way. The interesting thing about all of that is that nothing, the fundamentals is not changing. It's about how you need to think about the new nuances that gets created and the new risk that gets introduced as part of that. And I'll give you an example. If you look at any of the recent kind of cyber breaches, specifically if you think about the blockchain or cryptocurrency breaches,
Yes.
and you start analyzing kind of what happened there and kind of how it happened, it becomes pretty simple. A lot of the things, including if you date back to SolarWinds about a year ago, a lot of this is based on change management, the way that you made changes to your system, the way that you decided to design your systems. Because when you think about some of the cryptocurrency, everybody think, oh, that's blockchain, you can't change it. No. Yeah, you can't mute it, but there's a lot of changes that happens. There's code that gets written kind of on the blockchain that instructs how things needs to operate. And individually, the individual parts of the code, pretty simplistic. It's actually very simplistic. But what it does, it layers these blocks on top of one another. And that's really what creates the complexity and understanding that, hey, now security is tied into managed change, of how you manage change on your system. And if you didn't think about who you give access when you wrote it in the code, it can create some vulnerabilities later. So making sure that you get eyes on that and having organizations think about it. Now, for anybody that's been around for a while, actually no different from what happened in the mainframe days. So when you think about blockchain and how that works, you do step back a little bit in time to how we had to think through risk and manage it during the mainframe days. And then, so that's the one element that keeps on thinking about how do you manage and continue to be on top of that risk, especially with ESG that's going to start requiring companies to have a much better sense of governance over their environments. And then the other thing that is a big topic of mine is how do we, from a social perspective, deal with uh, moving a bigger portion of our population through the digital divide? And there's a lot that we can do, especially in the work that we do. We can train, we can mentor people to do what we do in our firm, specifically in technology risk. So how do we start getting over that hump, getting more people in, and taking some of the barriers out of the way, including thinking about, do I need people with 4-year degrees? Maybe the answer is no. And for me right now, the actual answer is no. I'm starting to hire people and train them up with either coming out of high school or kind of having 2-year associate degrees. And I think that could help us with some of that give back on making sure we kind of expand what we do in the population and giving people a different career track and different options that they otherwise wouldn't have had.
Well, I
So
think
that's a
that
thing in my mind.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Especially what I'm seeing now in students in high school is they're really very well adapted to coding and programming. They've kind of done it since they're 4 or 5 years old, and so I think it does make a difference because you have some very bright people that don't have a college degree or maybe don't even need it because they understand code. And going back to blockchain, I think what you really said is sort of like, hey, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. Similarly, when you look at blockchain, it is a simple code layered on top of each other, which creates the complexity. And you have to really break that down. And I think that's your point.
That's right. And there's a lot of changes also even just happening in the security space of people saying, hey, the way we kind of used to do kind of security might needs to change. Starting to think about different ways of implementing zero trust in your organization.
Right.
And then in doing so, how do I then also make sure the compliance elements that you need to be in compliant with other kind of SOX or any other banking regulations? How do I navigate through all of that while I'm making that change? And a lot of times people see that as a barrier, and it shouldn't be. Uh, I could see why it is, but if you start talking to people and you start thinking about the risks and you develop the right controls around those risks as you implement these new kind of security kind of theories in your organization, you can navigate through the risks.
Yeah, it's interesting about that because I think zero trust is really key to what we're doing. And I think the other thing is my experience has been I find a lot of companies somewhat complacent in their patching. Sure, they'll do the 0 days, but it's the other patches sometimes that might take them 60, 90, 120 days to patch. And from my perspective, it's those that create the vulnerabilities, not necessarily the 0 days. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, patching and vulnerabilities being creating is very interesting. uh, Especially when you think about what we're doing, because you get vulnerabilities that got created. Thinking just about SolarWinds or kind of Log4j, it's only vulnerabilities. And some of these is 0 day, some of them is not. But it also, if you think about the bad actors out there, because that's what it always comes down to. Yeah, you can have vulnerabilities, but until somebody actually knows about the vulnerability and wants to go and exploit it, there's no real risk. So it is a little bit of that. Hey, what other controls do I have in place? Because trying to make everything 0 day is impossible. You're most probably going to create even more risk in your system doing that than saying, hey, let me kind of at least have multiple controls, preventative and detective, in place that, hey, if I didn't patch 0 day, but I know my other controls are strong enough to see if somebody's trying to kind of play around my perimeter,
Yep.
then it's okay not to kind of do the 0-day patching. So it all comes down to kind of a risk decision every organization needs to make based on who they are, what they do, and the impact that a breach can have on their organization, but also on all their customers and the people they serve.
Well, that's true. And to your point, you can't just do it. You have to have, you can't just patch for 0-day. You have to have tools to let you know that someone is trying to get in. And typically, up until maybe a year ago, year and a half ago, it took about 270 days before companies recognized that they were being breached. Now I think it's less than a month. Have you had any experience in terms of those numbers and what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, it depends, Norm. It depends on the sophistication and the need for the organization. So banks, a lot of the big tech is going to pick this stuff up very, very quickly. Uh, but you still have organizations out there that they might be kind of somebody out there and they might be somebody lurking around, but does it really matter? So we get very intense on having to protect everything at all kind of times. But organizations, as they go through their overall governance framework, have to decide what's important and who we are as an organization and what we need to protect. Now, if you think about some of the high value targets, why does somebody want to breach your organization? It's because they either want to get some money out of you or they want to defraud you in some way. Uh, it's still a little far fetched, but they might want to manipulate your stock price so they can kind of make some money in the market. I do think, same as with kind of any of these blockchain breaches, you'll get discovered and people will know who you are when you do that. But if you put it in perspective, you want to make sure that you protect what needs to be protected based on the risk in the business and to society. Now, a lot of organizations don't always consider that part. They think just what do we do as a business? They don't really think about society kind of in broader terms. But it's still, for some of the organizations, will still kind of take a while for them to detect anybody in their systems, because and it's not just because of their environment, Norm. It's about the interdependency that's been created. Most organizations and most of these breaches don't always happen in their organizations. It
Right.
comes in from outside. It comes in from kind of your third party relationships. If you think about the SolarWinds breach, right? That was network engineering of kind of, hey, you breached a supplier to organizations, and that allowed somebody to come in. Now, if you think about SolarWinds and what they do, did they have a big concern that can create issues for their customers? I don't think they lost a lot of sleep on that one, because they most probably thought, hey, this is monitoring stuff, not thinking about the connection to super user accounts or privileged accounts on systems. And who would have thought that it can get that sophisticated? So that was a little bit of a wake up call on sophistication with kind of third party management. But that's where a lot of it comes from. So that interdependency kind of makes it very hard to really know whether kind of somebody will detect it in a short period of time.
Right. No, I hear you. And I think a lot of it now, for the most part, is really nation state. When we look at North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, it seems to me that those are the major players where they have literally hundreds of people on staff, working through these things. And I think that that's the issue. And the question is, how do we prevent those countries from doing what they do?
Yeah, it's there is elements of that I agree with, Norm. And yeah, do they have some power around that? Yeah, just like the US will, right? So
Yes.
we have to kind of put ourselves in the same bucket. But what are they trying to do? It's a different way of espionage on kind of military, kind of just what's going on in infrastructure, so critical infrastructure. That's where the risk will be from those. I don't see kind of nation kind of states really worrying about uh, locking down your network to kind of have ransomware. That's more of people that is trying to kind of steal money and kind of build up some stuff. Now, is there some of that could be there? Yes, but so I think there's two tranches of this: the people that is trying to kind of make a quick buck, getting you locked down and then getting cryptocurrency, and then there's the ones that, hey, we want to know what's going on, so we're going to figure out a way in and continue to observe what's going on, and giving us an advantage in kind of times of if there is ever a war or anything breaking down. So you don't have to send soldiers out. You can kind of create chaos in different ways.
Right. Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, when you think about that, think what would happen if somebody hacked into some of the major financial institutions and erased all of the data,
Yep.
mortgages, I mean, everything be gone. So yeah, it's critical. And to your point, we really didn't focus
Is
on.
that student loan forgiveness, Norm?
So that's right. Loan forgiveness, correct. Well, the other thing that we mentioned and we really need to talk about, and that is it's not so much companies that are exercising good due diligence to ensure the efficacy of their technological environments. It's about all of those third-party vendors and how we manage them to ensure that if they connect to a corporate environment, that they have all the correct protocols in place, all of the correct security. Because I mean, today you literally could have over 100,000 vendors that you have to manage or more in some environments. And I think those are, to your point earlier, I think those are some of the things that we have to look at.
Yeah, the one thing that I do reflect on a lot is I feel for CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs. Their jobs is very hard. So yes, you've got these third parties. Now, what we forget a lot when we think about security, cyber, and we think about kind of just overall IT risk management, think about the job and the responsibilities that sits on the kind of CIO, CTO, and CISO shoulders, right? Because and then they put between a rock and a hard place because you have to advance your organization. It's easy for a kind of IT executive to say, hey, we can't make any changes. We're going to run things as it is, and we're not going to continue to evolve. In that environment, you can keep everything safe, but then your business is not going to exist. So IT is still a support function to the business,
Right.
and they getting pushed by the business because the business needs to advance to start adopting all kinds of new technologies. Outsourcing came from, hey, we need to save cost. We can't be running all these servers at this cost when we've got an alternative of putting this on the cloud somewhere for a fraction of the price. Hey, we need to think about artificial intelligence or kind of smart automation because this is going to make our business better. We're going to be able to be more efficient. So they have to keep on adopting all this new changes in technology in their organizations, while they also have to then keep everything safe. So that IT risk management area that you have to focus on, there's a lot to do there, and it's never ending. I talked to a number of senior executives, and every year you kind of find different things either coming from the external auditors, the internal auditors, or somebody else that looked at the organization saying, well, you can do, and we found deficiencies here or we found deficiencies there. And you then have other people in the organization saying, why is IT always have these deficiencies? And the answer is it's because it's never stable. You can stabilize how you execute on accounts payable or payroll. It's very, very hard, if not close to impossible, to stabilize everything that happens in the IT organization. But yet, you don't have a lot of that first line of defense functions in the IT organization, really helping the CIO, the CTO, the CISO thinking about how they manage that in their organizations. So yes, they outsource and that creates risk, but they don't really have an option in a lot of these things because they have to be responsible stewards with the organization's money, but also kind of efficiency of driving the business.
Right. And, I think the other issue too is, and I say you can't prevent stupid. And by that, it's a phishing email that comes in. And, today, as we both know, some of them are highly crafted and really emulate a Bank of America or a FedEx or whomever. And if you have an account, I mean, I've had to look twice, three times sometimes before even considering opening an email. And clearly, if you look at from where it's coming, it's never Bank of America, FedEx. It's some iteration of it. So yeah, I think that's another issue. And to your point, you can't stabilize it, and especially with IoT coming along. And there's someone who said, "Please provide your thoughts on IoT devices security." So Werner, I'll let you take that question.
So that is going to be the big question. It actually worries me. I don't have a lot of those things in my household because
Yeah.
I don't know how you really protect against that. Uh, if you if this is going to continue to evolve, and if you keep on thinking about governance, I think for IoT, it is what software is being put onto these kind of devices. What is on your fridge? Kind of what is it connected to and how does it communicate and all the updates. If you want to really be safe, you're going to need some third party attestation on how people really manage that code and how the communications happen on all of that. It doesn't exist because it's not demanded. If I'm an organization that outsource my payroll to, say, ADP, I'm going to expect that third party attestation from kind of ADP having somebody independent that came in and looked at everything. You don't have that for all these IoT devices. And especially not even going down to kind of the chip level, right?
Right.
So the only way to really manage that is if there's something that really goes haywire and there's going to be some government type of intervention saying, hey, and you're going to sell this and you're going to have something that's going to be in people's houses, you need to kind of comply with XYZ standards. And there needs to be some third party attestation that you're doing all this stuff right.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it's going to be very, very hard to really manage what that's going to be. You're going to blindly trust. And I hear a lot about people actually getting kind of hacked into and they're actually using the IoT devices as part of their crypto mining or kind of other things that people want to do. So they steal that processing capacity. And that's going to keep on happening until individuals actually learn how to lock down their environment, but then also figure out how to feel safe with updates and vulnerabilities that is getting created from the software that's on those IoT devices.
It's interesting you say that because, and to your point, I do think it's important that at some point that the government, our government, holds companies that are like refrigerators that have, software embedded into them accountable uh, to us, and that they do provide certain levels of certification. Because to your point, if they're not doing that, someone can hack in, and that is not a good thing. I think the other thing that I find very concerning is artificial intelligence. I know we're all excited about it to some level, but I saw on LinkedIn actually, uh, there was a company out of the Netherlands that produced an image of Morgan Freeman with his voice, his face, and it was not him. It was not real. And it really sent chills right down my spine because what concerns me about that level of development is the intrusion into any kind of social situation, political situation, etc. And I think there's an area there that I believe we really need to be very, very concerned about. Have you had any thoughts on that within your experiences?
All that I can say, Norm, is Pandora's box has been opened. Uh, it is concerning, but I'm sure there is ways especially if it's going to be, hey, is this real? Is it not real? Uh, Ways to kind of deal with that. But artificial intelligence is that box has been opened. People's continuing to trying to figure out how it works. Now, the the interesting part of this is everybody's continuing to try it. And when you talk about what they created there, I don't know how sophisticated that is necessarily, right? When you think about real artificial intelligence, it's something that really start to think for itself. Now, the only way it can think for itself, it keeps on with data input, and then how that data gets kind of processed for output. Now, you can control that with the data input, but most of the experiments that's happening in this space keeps on when you put it in the real life environment, there's something that keeps on going wrong. So every time, and you can look at all the studies and things that MIT has published, they keep on working on it. They have it in a small environment where they can control the inputs and how it works, and then they get the outputs they want. As soon as you put it in a situation that's much larger in the real world, they don't always get what they want out of those, and they have to shut it down. So there is still some kind of room to think about what inputs. So if you think about how that's going to work, you have to have more predictability on the inputs so that you can have a better sense of what the output is going to be. A lot of what the organizations out there call artificial intelligence is really just smart automation at this point, uh, which is still a little bit under our control. Once AI really takes off, nobody knows. It's very, very scary. I hope it happens where it kind of really comes to realization after I no longer have to worry about it, Norm. But it's
No,
very
no,
scary.
I hear you. Well, clearly with deep fakes, that is a very serious situation. And I'm going to date myself when we talk about inputs and outputs, and I remember this guy go garbage in, garbage out, and typically, that's kind of what happens if you're not with good data, having good data and putting it into a situation. So yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear, on that. So I'm looking at some of the comments here. They're kind of interesting. We're talking about the refrigerators, and one person says, and that type of intrusion into home appliances must be made illegal. Um, yeah, probably, but think about it from another perspective. One of if you're running a restaurant, wouldn't it be nice to know what your inventory is? You put stuff on a shelf, and there is a sensor that records what it is, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with refrigerators. So maybe in a commercial environment, it might make sense. But then again, are we losing a little bit of our capacity to think if we're relying on all this technology?
We lose a little bit of heart too, Norm. I think it's part of the experience. It's part of that specialization of knowing what you need to have in your fridge and kind of being more predictive. Could a fridge learn that over time? Sure, it's part of that smart automation that you can have. But do you really need to have that? And do your fridge really have to order your milk for you? I could see how that could be comfortable, but the question is, how many people is going to want to live like that? Where it's saying, you know what, it's kind of giving me a reason to get in the car to drive to the supermarket. How hard it is to know I need milk and put it on my app saying, hey, could I get this delivery? And it shows up at my door. Having to have that additional kind of ease of the fridge just doing it for you. I don't know if it's really adding that much value.
Yeah, I don't think it is, quite frankly. I think it's a waste, time, money, and energy. I kind of nice to know what you're missing or you're not missing when you are have to go out and go food shopping or whatever kind of shopping. So yeah, I hear you loud and clear on that.
I equate it to what I have in my car sometimes. Is they starting to have this gesture control. in the vehicles, right? Where
Yes.
if you want to turn up the sound, you kind of turn your finger if you want to turn it down, but you've got a
Yes.
button on your steering wheel.
I've
So
seen that.
so sometimes kind of having all that stuff, and maybe okay, it's kind of fun for a while, but I always go back to either turning the knob or kind of doing it on my steering wheel versus using gesture control. And gesture control then adds the additional annoyance that if it sees something move, sometimes it either skips a channel and it's like, I don't want to skip the channel. So now I have to wonder how I get back to that channel. And there is no gesture for that, which kind of makes life a little harder than it needs to be.
Agreed. Agreed. I want to talk a little bit about quantum computing. Have you heard from any of your customers, clients, friends, whatever, where they're going with that, what their thoughts are?
So I think a lot of those things is still in the with the brain trust. So either in academia or some of these places that is kind of playing with it as part of experimentation. I have not run into personally a lot of that sitting in most businesses. So interesting things to think about. Still very theoretical
Yes.
in what I'm experiencing.
Well, I think the one concern, and not now, maybe it's 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. But when we look at encryption and we look at, and I've shared this on the show in the past, when we look at AES 128-bit encryption, and I'll ask someone, how long does it take to decrypt that? Oh, we'll go say 3 years. I'll say no, little over 10 billion years to decrypt that. And at AES 256, it's off the charts. It's not going to happen. But with a quantum computer, that same decryption takes somewhere between 6 to 8 months. And that's right now not what I find concerning. And clearly both Verizon and AT&T are going to be building out infrastructures to accommodate for that kind of computing process and the security of it as well. But I still think we need to be at least thinking about it on the edges and be aware of it.
Yeah, it can create disruption. So you always have to kind of think about that disruption that can get created. But as you said, there is still some infrastructure that's going to be needed to be able to do this at any level of scale. And 6 months, 8 months, decryption doesn't really concern me just yet, but it can soon enough.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, we both may not be around on this planet when it's up to speed and really functioning as computers do today, because I do think that's a long way out. And it's not going to happen that quickly. And it is extremely expensive, as we both know, for that to happen.
Yeah.
The other thing I like to talk about is, one of the things I've learned being in technology, and that is we as technologists have to be the groups that say yes to our business partners. And that is not always the case. And, here on our show, I think it's important that we talk about that. We should not be the place of no. It's how we work. How do you work around and make things happen?
I agree with you 100%. As somebody that's been in risk management for a very long time, I have even seen just going through the different stages. And when you kind of, in the younger part of your career, you kind of feel you have to say it's a yes or no answer. And life is not that simple. Life happens in the shades of gray. And we have to kind of help our organizations move forward and get stuff done. Now, there's a way to say this and do it, but still protect the organization. Uh, and that takes a little bit of learning and education over the years of where is the line? How do I say and be positive that we can do something, but still highlight the risk that gets created by doing something in a different way and helping the organization manage that risk, and not just manage it, but also understand the decision that you're making and the cost that comes along with it. Because you can do something that takes you, say, a week to put together, not that expensive to do, but it can suddenly create a risk profile from a dollar perspective that outweighs the benefit that this is going to add to the organization. Now, coming up with that numbers and knowing what it is, that's the hard part. So educating ourselves and thinking through, okay, simple thing, we can do it for the organization. Here's the risk, but getting to the place where you can quantify it for senior executives, because that's the stuff that resonates with them. If they hear, oh, it takes a week to do, we can do it, but there's a little bit of risk, but you can't quantify it for them, their answer is always going to be, let's get it done. Until you've got a good way of starting to quantify it. And the only way to do that is understanding the interdependencies that this change is going to have on other parts of the organization and as part of your risk profile and kind of risk environment, and knowing what it cost you already and what it's going to add to the cost. And that takes experience, and that takes bringing in others that can help you through that over time. But being able to navigate that, we want to say yes, we just need to be clear on the cost.
Understood. Yeah, there's a LinkedIn user here. Let me see his comments. We know how to do security. We just don't do it, I guess, and it will always be challenging, but we ignore the most basic concepts and techniques. Let's see, AppSec, reduced privilege, good FW rules, firewall rules, patching, etc., under the pressure of marketing and first to market. Just getting the basics under control will hugely improve organizational security. Yeah, I would think so.
100% agreed. That
Yeah.
most of the stuff that happens is some of the basic things that when it comes in, people just don't think about the basics. And as I said, Norm, for the CIO CISO organization, it's how do I introduce those people thinking about the risks in their organizations into those organizations, right? Because they've
Sure.
got some people, and if you think about, especially everybody focusing on security, they help manage risk, but they are not kind of focused and trained to really think about how to manage the risk. Yes, you can put different things in place, but coming down to that basics on how you're going to do things differently and how you're going to communicate that through, there's just so much demands on the security professionals' time that is not first and foremost in their minds. So they get done what needs to be done, and then these things come out afterwards. And a lot of times it turns out to be kind of basic missteps. Uh, but I think as organizations mature, more automation being put in place, especially when organizations start getting much better, I would say gold standard kind of templates of how they need to configure things when they put new things in, thinking about, oh, I'm going to do business with this organization. They want access to this privilege on my system. How am I going to manage that and now tap that into something that needs to be monitored? Some of these basic things that get skipped over just because of how organizations run. And most of these things, as they said, comes down to basic things. And it seems to continually being missed.
Yeah. No, I hear you. We know is interesting too. When you talk about automation, and that is, I'll share this with the audience that probably a few months or no more than about a year ago, I think it was, as I'm going through a lot of SOC 2 Type 2s and I'm reviewing them and I'm finding fewer and fewer and fewer observations. So you may recall I picked up the phone and I called you and I said, Werner, I'm finding fewer and fewer. And you said, Norm, it's about automation. Companies are getting smarter. And so they're automating a lot of these manual processes and getting rid of spreadsheets as well. So I thought that to be interesting. And to your point.
Yeah. And it keeps on happening, and it's good. Now I'll go back to point number one. When you introduce that automation, you create other risks in the profile as well. So while you do that, you have to make sure you manage that, but it's a little easier because that human nature that comes in that can make mistakes, computers only make mistakes if you program them wrong.
Right.
So if you can kind of go through and how it needs to operate, it's going to operate the same thing. Now you need to think about the human part of that. If I'm going to change things from one server to another and I didn't update my monitoring software to say monitor the new kind of server that I put in place, and something goes wrong there, you're never going to know. So you still have some of that now in the environment. They're also getting smarter. Could I now monitor everything and seeing if there's something new in there and make sure that that's now sitting on my kind of monitoring list? So those are the things that you found and actually had exceptions on in these reports, but companies is getting smarter and just having more of that in the system.
Got it. As I'm looking here, one LinkedIn user is saying quantum computing is not keeping me up at night. I'm glad it's not, but unpatched servers are. And yeah, I think that is a big issue. I think we talked about a little bit earlier that, yeah, the 0 days get patched, but it's a lot of the secondary and tertiary patches where people tend to lag behind.
Yeah, and the it changes organization to organization as well. So when you work in a large organization that has got kind of many multiples kind of servers and infrastructure out there, especially companies that over the years merged, acquired other organizations, those are the ones that gets really tricky. And getting them to get on the same kind of playing field and running consistently across all the organizations and the proper integration, I have found that things take companies and organizations years to accomplish. Once they get to that kind of state of really having integrated all their systems, it makes it easier. But the cost benefit of this kind of comes to play, especially at, okay, we've got the plans to do this, it's the right thing to do. But hey, I've got this new acquisition, or there's something that happened that money needs to be invested in. So I'm going to hold off because it's big investments getting
Sure.
organizations to standardize in that way. But that is the thing that keeps me up, because if I have 5 organizations, 4 of them did everything right with patching their servers, and there's interdependency between them, and one did not, that's the place where people's going to get in and then compromise the other 4.
Right. And now let's multiply that into thousands of vendors that may have access of some kind. So yes, I hear you loud
That's
and clear.
exactly right.
That's where the problem is.
Yeah.
There's another question from Diane Michelson on LinkedIn. She's saying, with facial recognition being used to replace entering passwords, think iPhone, with Morgan Freeman and Tom Cruise being deep fakes, how can authentication be addressed in the meta world? Good question.
It is something that really scares me, especially when my daughter grabs my phone and stick it on my face to open up, right? So the good part is that everybody's wearing masks these days, so it's a little harder. You have to kind of get somebody after they had their mask off. But I think thinking through how you want to do that and how to manage that is going to be very, very interesting, because facial recognition by itself, you can override that in so many different ways. Uh, so I actually, after I kind of had that experience, I said, okay, how do I do kind of a password all the time? It's so convenient to have facial recognition, but it
Sure.
means that you really have to control that, and you can't really control kind of somebody getting into your phone. You even think about uh, just, hey, I get pulled over something, and kind of some law enforcement say, hey, I want to see what's on your phone. I'm saying, no, they've got the phone in their hand and they got my face in front of them, they can open it up. I don't have to do anything, right?
Yep.
So not that they do that, but it is a scary thought that you no longer have that control of locking it down if you choose to use facial recognition. So it is concerning, and that's something, because nothing big has gone wrong in that space. A lot of people don't really think about it because it's convenient, and if it's convenient, people seem to kind of opt for what's convenient versus what keeps them safe in the moment.
Exactly. Well, I think too, along those lines is as consumers aren't educated in technology per se, they don't know about risks like we do because we deal with it every day. So there is that big issue, and even people that are highly educated, if they're not in technology, they may not understand the inherent risks that come with facial recognition and don't take the necessary precautions. Whether it's a CEO of a company, they may not be aware, an EVP, just because they're not technologists and they haven't been educated. But hopefully, in large companies, that the HR department will train all of their employees on what the dangers are when it comes to facial recognition, et cetera, et cetera. What I like to do, though, is I like to swing a little bit back over to risk, Werner, and talk about that as it relates to third party risk and really some of the artifacts that really should be looked at to help with the vetting of an organization. So how do you get over that inherent risk? What do you have to look at? And from my perspective, it's things like the SIG from shared assessments, or the NIST 853R, some of those questionnaires, along with what you mentioned earlier, third-party certification, possibly a penetration test, a current penetration test to be used. What else do you see to help vet vendors?
So I don't think anybody that's in the space has seen all of this stuff. We've got a lot of frameworks out there. I actually think about it a little bit differently. When I'm going to do business with a organization, who are they? What is their core culture? We don't talk about that culture often enough. If you've got a business that really cares about what they're doing and they've got a culture of openness and kind of discussion around this stuff, you're going to have an organization that's going to do and continue doing the right thing as they kind of grow. Because a big part of what we are as technologists is you need to have a growth mindset, right? Same as I love working with people and kind of hiring people that's got that growth mindset. Yep, it's this way today, but I need to continue challenging myself because it could be different tomorrow. Same way as the way you need to assess some of those organizations. Who are they? Why do they do what they do? And do they really have me as their core focus in keeping us safe? Because I can go check them. There's tons of checklists that you can go through and thinking about what they need to be doing and executing on. But we all know it only takes one mess up to kind of make that whole house of cards come crumbling down. And the risk of that one thing existing is really based on the organization's culture, the culture that they kind of train their people on, the focus the organization have. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about that when we do business with organizations. It always comes down to, do you have this stuff in place? What's the price I'm going to get? They don't dig into those other things. And it's a little bit like investment. Think about the way Warren Buffett thinks about organizations and companies he wants to invest in. He goes and he looks at the business. Does he understand it? And what does he think about management? And if he likes management or organization and he can understand that business, he will invest. We know what a lot of the companies are doing. We never really dig into their culture, because the people that's negotiating some of this, a lot of times, is not the people in the IT organization or the security organization. It's procurement. Procurement don't really analyze that stuff. They don't think about And we try to risk management afterwards. So they want this checklist that you go through.
Right.
But a lot of these companies and what they do comes down to the people and the culture. So I think if we want to improve that environment, as we start adding that lens into how people's doing things.
You just hit on a nerve, procurement. And to me, it is essential that technology develops an excellent relationship with procurement. Because to your point, if you don't have that, you're going to suffer. And to me, it's always been a key point to get to know those folks so that they rely on you and begin to ask the technology groups, what do you think? And to your point, they don't seem to do that as much as they need to across the board. So, I think everybody on this call, think about procurement and how you can improve your relationships if you don't have one with those organizations, because that will save you a lot of angst going forward, for sure. The other thing too, when we look at risk, what do you think about continuous monitoring? When you have vendors and you put them on a continuous monitoring list, do you think there's value there, value add?
There could be, depends on what you continuously monitor, right? So most big organizations that use a lot of third parties do have a pretty good third party management process in place. They do good risk management decision making on who should be on that continuous monitoring list and who's kind of people we have to keep on checking in with, but it's not something really critical in the organization that needs to be kind of dealt with all the time. So for some, I would say absolutely. If it's a critical function to your business, there needs to be is a process of continuous monitoring, but you don't need that for everybody. So it comes back to that kind of risk decision making process that you have to go through.
Got it. Got it. We've got about 7 minutes left. I'm wondering if we have any more questions. Let's see here.
And Norm, I'm seeing on the list people saying, "Hey, let's connect." So do I have access to kind of just looking at this over time? Well, in the next day to kind of just make sure anybody that wanted to kind of talk
Sure.
offline I can connect with.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. Give me a moment. I can give you an answer. Right. Yep. You will definitely be able to get that list and connect with these people.
Great.
So all these folks, good news. You get to meet with Werner. Like I said, I've known the man for 16 years, and I trust him implicitly and explicitly, sort of like a firewall rule set, right? Deny all. In this case, you will.
Always check but verify, Norm.
That's right. That's right. Always trust but verify, and that's good. Let's see if you have any more questions. Okay, from a LinkedIn user, love that you mentioned critical role of procurement. Would you also address role of HR? Werner?
The answer is absolutely. Uh, and I've had some funny stories over the years in security where the head of HR kind of didn't want to deal with third party kind of people coming into the organization like freelancers. So there was a suggestion made that they change the title to employee management, not human resource management. Because if you want to be human resource manager, you need to make sure you deal with all people coming into your organization. Uh, and HR is a critical function, and their systems. Some of the most interesting things I've seen over the years in security was based on HR systems, not getting timely information, or the process that they followed in HR kind of created a gap with how I'm going, especially with the automation we talked about, a gap of offboarding people off your system. Because the way that they put in people, I can put somebody in, my control could be that I get a list of everybody that got terminated in the last week. But if somebody puts in that termination 3 weeks from now, but backdated, I'm never going to get that employee on my list. So how do I make sure I kind of take them off if I kind of do that automatically and the system is looking at kind of the wrong dates? So some of those things that the HR department does becomes very important. And there's an interesting part of this, especially with automation. With, with you're going to have IDs on your system that no longer belongs to a person, but it belongs to a bot, right? So if you've got an ID belonging to a bot, how do you control that? Is that going to kind of flow through something like HR, or is that going to kind of be handled on the side? Should HR kind of help organizations deal with that? Interesting questions to get answers to.
Yeah,
But HR is a critical function.
that is really interesting. So what would be your recommendation if you have a username attached to a bot?
I don't have one yet, Norm, because it's right now it's easy enough, depends on how much companies use it, to have it managed by, okay, I know how many bots I have, I know what that IDs are. But if you think about how that flows in security, that bot logs into systems to retrieve information to do its job. So managing it centrally, most probably within the IT organization, makes a lot of sense at the moment, but I don't know if that will continue to make sense.
Got it. We've got about 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left. One question, insider threat. That can be a problem. Vetting. I mean, I've come across vendors in the past that when I ask them, "Do you validate resumes?" and they say no, and I just have to shake my head. You know, to me, that's critical. How do you know whether it's true or not? Whether or not someone is saying, they provide information, and is it true? Is it false? How do you do that without vetting and verifying resumes?
Yeah, you can shake your head on that, Norm, but when you have to work for some of these organizations that's tiny, that needs to work on a shoestring budget, these things and it's expensive. It's normal for us in big organizations that this is just a way it works and the way that we kind of manage through it, but it gets very expensive for them. So finding different ways of validating that could be good, might be even an opportunity for somebody. How do I scan and kind of do this electronically where I know if what people saying is who they are and kind of what they can do? uh, but it's hard. I never fault people for not doing it in smaller organizations. I highly recommend it, but it's expensive.
Got it. No, I understand. I hear you loud. Yeah, because as I think about it, there are companies that could 12, 13, 14 people that maybe are working, providing a really valuable service to a large corporation. You're right. They don't have the funds to do it. So you have to be creative in those ways to find other ways to validate who they're hiring. So I hear you loud and clear on that. And it's a good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
What else? Do we have any more before we've got a few seconds left. We talked about insider threats. I think we're good. I want to thank everybody for coming on the show. I really wish everyone who's listening to have a happy and healthy new year. And may all of us be safe from any COVID variants and whatever. So thank you, everybody. And Werner, thank you very, very much for coming on the live stream. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you for having